Welcome to a short edition of the Crossing Faiths podcast, where a Christian and a Muslim talk religion and politics. I'm Matt Hawkins, and I'm joined with my co-host, JT Pinna. We're going to dispense with the usual intros to get right into contents because this episode is all about politics. We're going to give our reflections on the first debate between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden here and now, along with everybody else in the social media space, giving their quick takes. But John, what do you think?
Well, I think everybody's thinking the same thing. One is, I think on the macro level, we're all sitting here going, "We can't believe our democracy has come to this," right? So, I guess the Chinese were celebrating, our demise of democracy. It, you know, I,
It was nice while it lasted, huh?
well, I don't know if it's civil discourse is part of our culture. Disruption is a part of our culture. There's a reason why we have police officers in cruisers catching us speeding is because we don't inherently follow the law.
Right.
We see 55 and we figure 65, 66 is kind of the safe
Right.
harbor. So there's that. I think that, like I said, I always think macro first. So on the macro level, we have democracies all over the world that have been sliding, and as a result of all this sliding, and what I mean by that is that election fraud, dictatorships operating under democratic rule. We've got Putin that's been president for 20 years. And a lot of African states. So I think that there's this component of, America is not immune to that infiltration of that concept.
Yeah.
And I was speaking probably specifically about the voter fraud claims. So I think that's something that sticks out to me from being in international development and operating in in totalitarian regimes, doing international development, regime change, and capacity building. But then on the micro level, like, I don't know how Biden could have reacted any differently, although it's very clear that he is an old guy. It's pretty clear he's an old guy. Not that I don't think his faculties are gone. I don't think any of that is, but it's pretty clear that he's got to think about it a little bit before he jumps and reacts. And the president was pretty, he's using the same game book that he used with Hillary, which, destroyed her. But Biden held his ground. That's the thing. I mean, he could get us. You don't really say, "Oh, I can't get a sentence out of him." He did. He could get a sentence out of him.
Yeah.
He did hold his own. He didn't get baited. He was on point. His advice and guidance from his team was, I don't know how sound it was, but when the president starts needling him, him turning to the American people and saying, buy a Coke. I was like, maybe we should get some Coke. What do you think? What's your
like you, I'm going to try to stick with kind of the macro implications of this instead of going play by play through a lot of that you're going to hear from other people. I mean, shortly on the micro, I think both candidates landed some decent punches. I do think Biden didn't come across quite as energetic as Trump does, but you're right. He didn't get baited into the usual the Trump stuff as much as he may have been tempted to. I think if either if supporters of either candidate think that last night was an outright win for their particular candidate, I don't think they're looking terribly objectively. They're each candidate, I think, struck some blows, but I don't think they convinced anybody new about to join their cause. And both had some moments that may have repelled. Reluctant voters on either side. Macro, As a Christian looking at this, and one who thinks about the Christian witness in the public square, um, I look at last night as more of it's a result of our own self governing, really. That these it's In case I broke up there, I'm going to re-say it because my internet connection dropped out. I think last night was a result of uh, our self governance and our status of self governance and how we have either tended to it or neglected it. And I think we see last night, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I think we see a lack of stewardship of our roles as citizens, which places us not just as subjects under rule of a government or a ruler, but as citizens who participate in the governing process. Most of us have very little influence and very little participation, but part of what it means to be an American is to contribute and participate in some form or fashion. That means we carry with that more than just a pragmatic vote. We carry with that moral responsibility to tend to our citizenship in our communities and to some extent at the national leadership. So the debate and the the nonsense that went on during that debate, a lot of factors leading up to that. I'm hesitant to pick out just one or two for the sake of time, and neglect a lot of other. But this stuff, what needs to fix last night, so that we don't have this repeat again. It takes a lot of stuff that's upstream from presidential politics. So that's my riff.
Yeah, I mean, well, I get it on the micro level. I think it just got, you're starting to get personal. It and get into moral character. I just don't know how I just don't know how the where the Trump campaign, where they think they can go with that. So
Yeah.
the name. I mean, there's a name calling and all this other stuff. I mean, that's a brand of Trump, the president. So that's how he rocks. But now you've got T-shirts that are saying, was it "Shut Up, Man" or whatever the T-shirts are that are coming out. I see all the slogans today. I was like, So, but he was trying to hammer his sons, Biden's sons, and it's like, you open that can, it goes right into a whole slew of, get into the Trump companies, Trump families, all that other stuff, and I just, you kind of forego all this stuff once this moral high ground, once you're dealing with the presidency that we're dealing with, and regardless of, you and I have had podcasts about this before where we talk about remember, is Trump the Messiah, right? We already had this whole one where we got into that, and the pragmatism of supporting the president, even though you're Christian, and even though there's a lot of moral stuff going on. And so when you forego all of that moral high ground when it comes to character, in lieu of someone who's appointing judges and pushing your political agenda, and this is the struggle that your community and your tribe has been having with the president. Our community struggles with lobbyism, the same thing, but with different bad actors. I think that it's very, very difficult to take some of this stuff seriously. Clinton was attacked on moral high ground, right? So that was his whole deal. There was his personal character was terrible, right?
Yeah.
And we interact very, very regularly when we were in Washington with Greg Mitchell. Greg Mitchell, I worked very closely with, who started the impeachment process under Congressman Rogan, and so now you're supporting a president that has all these different moral and character flaws, right? From a moral and Christian level, I would say, right? So, and from a ethics and rules, but from a particularly your tribe. But then you're not saying you are, but then supporting the getting into the moral character of another person when there's very little moral high ground here.
Right.
Is tough. It's tough to swallow when we're trying to figure out what the policies are going to be, and then the nation's in crisis.
Yeah,
So,
if you're going to rationalize using pragmatism, then just own the pragmatism of it all, and don't try to port in kind of a moral argumentation where you have a candidate who's pretty much flaunted that. The last comment I'll make is that no, on the one hand, I'm not typically a doom and gloom kind of guy. I have faith in Americans that regardless of what happens election day, the bulk of America will be okay. And be responsible citizens. That said, the discussion last night about depending upon which way election day goes, whether each
right.
candidate will abide by the decisions and whether or not respective tribes, so to speak, will be peaceful if their side loses. Last night was pretty disturbing. On the one hand, you didn't have President Trump assure America or kind of talk to his own side about with a command or a demand or a plea even to remain peaceful
Yeah.
if he
It
loses.
was like
And
stand
then
down and hold,
yeah,
right? Is what he
but
said.
and right, and but then on the other hand, maybe not equally as distressing, but still distressing, is that if Biden does win, and if we do experience violence and rioting from rightward actors, you have then a president or a president elect, not even a president yet, a president elect who doesn't so much have buy-in from a lot of law enforcement agencies from across the country. So regardless of who wins, Americans have reason to be concerned, regardless who's at the ship,
Yeah.
and that's concerning. So we'll see how all this turns out. Maybe the bright lining in all of this is that America had a shared experience, which a healthy community needs. But we had all had a shared experience last night, and our reaction was almost uniformly united in some ways. So maybe that's the shared experience we need to pull out of 2020. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
Last
I mean,
word.
I can, well, I always say you can say whatever you want about the president, but he's created political participation from almost all parties, all people, and everybody is in on the issues or the non-issues. I don't know, right? So there's that. I think that when I think you're right about the peaceful transition. I was listening to General McMaster uh, talk about how the military won't get involved if in the election, meaning, and it was meant. I took it the wrong way when I initially heard the comments, but I took it as though uh, he was he was basically saying, look, the military doesn't get involved in the peaceful transition of American democratic elections. That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
I was taking it initially as though they're just going to keep their hands up and let things fly. I think that's a naive statement at this point, and I think we're going to end up we're going to end up with some kind of controversy because there's disinformation. There's a lot of questions about what's going to happen, and it's kind of anybody's game. And if we don't assure a peaceful transition, I mean, Afghanistan had a peaceful transition. So they've been at war since arguably since 1979, or 1980, and you could argue that they've been at war since 1240. So you could since the Mongol invasion, and so you could argue. So I think that we have a lot to be concerned about, but the participation is here, and all eyes are on things. So, but when you tell the far right or the militias to stand down and hold, that doesn't sit well with me at all.
It's really not helpful.
And so that doesn't because we've had the most attacks on places of worship in the latter 3 years, not by Muslims, by white dudes, mostly white dudes, and those white dudes are are affiliated with a group, or and of course they don't look at it as from a religious standpoint, meaning that law enforcement doesn't look at it from a religious standpoint. But I argue that there's always a Christian doctrine associated in that, no matter how warped it may
Well,
be.
yeah, it's if it is there, it's warped. But the
Right.
Poway, the shooter, the shooter of the Poway synagogue in California, claimed to be, he's out of a Calvinistic Presbyterian background.
Yeah.
I want to say
Well,
and hope that he's an outlier, but
yeah.
the other white supremacy stuff, it's certainly decentralized in a way that law enforcement and anti-terror groups or folks are still trying to get their minds around. But there's certainly a concentration of white supremacist, quote unquote lone wolf actors inspired
Right.
by this nonsense. It only takes one person. It only takes one guy out there to feel like he's emboldened by the current moment and current leadership to kill more
Yeah. It
people.
was it was very tough to hear that stand down and hold. That was a tough one,
Yeah.
because it's basically saying, wait until I give the signal of what I think is going to happen. And so I don't think there's any scenario where the president will say it's not fraud. I don't think there's any scenario.
It was such a softball question from Chris
Yeah.
Wallace,
Yeah.
and he had every opportunity um, to do that once again in the public limelight that he hasn't done since at least 2017. He keeps
Yeah.
passing up clear, easy opportunities to call out white supremacists and actors, and he rebuffs or equivocates or diverts the conversation in another direction, like he did last night, and that's troubling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I mean, what's your words of wisdom for the American people?
Participate, vote, but love your neighbor.
Okay. I would say participate, vote. Well, I mean, we could say love your neighbor, but listen to the podcast.
Listen to the
You got
podcast. Yeah. Listen to
you
Crossing
gotta,
Phase. There you go.
yeah,
I
yeah,
missed
I
the I missed the
understand.
marketing aspect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
are
yeah.
you with that? Anyways,
All right.
thank you, Matt, for taking the
Thank,
time. I appreciate it.
thank you, John. This has been another episode of Crossing Phase, available wherever you find podcasts and also on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thank you. It was
Oops,
good.
hitting the wrong button. Wait for it.
Nope. No.